Hello, everyone. NWE War Reports here with the 14th of April 2023 frontline update for the Russo Ukrainian War. As per usual, we are going to start in the area of Bakhmut, where we once again have some more updates on the situation there. Just a quick recap on what has happened here inside the town over the last couple of days. The Ukrainian side is still fighting on the eastern side of the railroad bank, and that's in this particular neighborhood right here. There is some information going around about there. I mean, this is like not. This is a very low level of confidence in this information, so take it with a huge grain of salt. But apparently, there's an entire battalion of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. That's the Ukrainian 93rd Mechanized Brigade. It's one of the more famous units. Been involved in combat in the Donbass since 2014. The word is what some people are saying is that they are trapped over there, and if they don't get out, they could be encircled and forced to surrender. And by battalion, the suggestions I've seen have said that it's around 300 men. This is based on the battalion probably being under strength. Also, Ukrainian battalions, probably not being the size as you would, normally imagine them to be, which would be like 1,000 men. They're more like half that. Smaller units. Anyways, there is this little section of central Bakhmut that is still under Ukrainian control. The Russians have recently moved into and taken over the entirety of the rail line north of that, and they also moved into this high-rise neighborhood here as well. And if you guys will remember, in the update yesterday, we talked about the gravity of this situation. This would allow the Russians to attack in multiple different directions, potentially outflanking Ukrainian troops in the industrial zone, like the grain elevators and such, that they've set up a defensive line on next to the railroad. And it appears like that has happened, at least to some extent. The most recent update from the battlefield, go ahead and make this red as confirmed gains. We're going to go ahead and delete this. This was a counterattack that the Ukrainians had made. The Russians had already once moved across the railroad and managed to capture this grain elevator. It appears like that has happened again, and the Ukrainians have been forced to completely withdraw from this neighborhood here to the north. So they have withdrawn from this neighborhood here. This is reported by a number of sources, but like always, the most reliable one that is reporting on this is Syriac Maps. All of the rest of these high rises in this northern district, in this area right here, have fallen, as well as many of these city blocks. This industrial zone, meaning that the Russians have managed to capture and cross the rail line as well. So I'll give you guys that full area here, and it's a lot larger than the area that ended up collapsing yesterday. So it virtually extends up to this street. I believe it extends down into this area as well. So as you can see there, a very large chunk of territory now falling into Russian hands in the middle of central Bakhmut. So this is a pretty big deal. Like I've said in yesterday's video, Ukraine is trying to reverse the Russian gains and hold on to Bakhmut, but it has not been trending in that direction. Every day, more and more of the city falls into Russian hands. And it seems like at this point, every day, larger and larger chunks of the city have been falling into Russian hands. So that is today's update for the city of Bakhmut. In terms of other updates, there are some. First, we're going to scroll up to the north here and look at the area of Seversk and Bilogorovka specifically. There's some rumors that the Russians have started attacking in this area here. Specifically, in the town of Bilogorovka, the Russians have managed to recapture some ground. That ground I already have marked on here. So some sources, Syriac Maps being one of them, has a lot more territory in this particular area. that is under Ukrainian control, and significantly more than I do. So I have somewhat missed that, but he points out that the Ukrainians control um, something like this, and these forest lines, these tree lines here, all the way down to part of this highway here to the south, right here. So this area is under Ukrainian control. We're just going to mark it like this for the time being, and I will adjust the map later to reflect this. But this isn't a new development. Ukraine has had this territory for some time. However, there are areas here where the Russians have creeped up and moved in closer to Bielogorivka. This particular salient right here being one of them, also moving up down here to the south towards the quarry. So these are areas that the Ukrainians did have even more territory around it, but now the Russians are starting to encroach on that area. We're getting word of pretty heavy artillery bombardments along this line. This leads some people to believe that Seversk could be the next target for the Russians once Bakhmut falls. I wouldn't be too surprised about that. Main reason being is the Russian troop concentrations. Real quick, we're going to go to the deep state map. This is a pro-Ukrainian map where they have tried to use open source and various types of intelligence to determine what Russian units are operating where. This kind of thing has a lot of value to the Ukrainian side, just as similar information has a lot of value to the Russian side. Both sides obviously want to know where the other side's units are. But you can see from this map here two very large. I'm embarrassed because I told you guys I would fix this a long time ago, but I never did. But two very large groupings of Russian units are in this area. First of all, you have the Russian grouping around Bakhmut, which is in the center, and the city of Bakhmut itself. You're talking about Wagner personnel now on the northern and southern flanks. Entire paratrooper divisions are covering that area. This is a very large grouping of troops. And then you also see a very large grouping of troops in this area right here, which I would guess most are in reserve. Most are actually probably stationed in Rubizhny and Lysychansk, Severodonetsk. Just the fact that they're marked as being in this area of Kremenaya, it could be just a complete misdirection. The Russians could be keeping their units there, the command posts there. And these forces could move really anywhere in the Donbass zone in inside of a couple hours. Like this entire army grouping here could all of a sudden show up in Touretsk, over the course of time from like midnight to 4 a.m. Which I'm sure both sides end up doing things like that a lot. That's just kind of one of the things you have to consider with modern warfare is how quickly some of these units can actually redeploy to like different areas. But I would guess that potential attack on Seversk, it shouldn't be out of the question considering there's so many Russian troops in the area, but also you have to consider the possibility that these troops could rapidly be redeployed somewhere else. So, okay. One of the other last things I wanted to go over was the prospect of Ukrainian counteroffensive and when that might take place. It is the 14th of April right now, and this is my personal assessment based somewhat on the leaked documents that came out. But inside of those leaked documents, it was mentioned how much equipment had been delivered to Ukraine. And this was a graph or it was a chart of some sorts that was saying, like this is how much equipment has been promised, this is how much has been delivered, and this is the percentage that's been delivered. And there's a lot of equipment, and this was early March that this was out, and there was a lot of equipment that had not yet been delivered to Ukraine, and we're talking for like most of the different equipment categories. like it's like motorized vehicles like Humvees, MRAPs, tanks, APCs, everything except for self-propelled artillery was well under 50% delivered, and that was at the beginning of March. Self-propelled artillery was closer, I believe, to the 80%. It's probably all already there. So all this, the SP artillery that's been promised is probably in Ukraine at this point. That tells me that Ukraine, throughout March and still currently through April and then through some part of May probably isn't going to be equipped and ready to conduct an offensive. Not only that, but there was also a report in that intelligence article that was suggesting the Ukrainian units that were being formed in order to carry out an offensive operation, and it was a total of 12 brigades. Three of the brigades were being trained inside of Ukraine by the Ukrainian army. The other nine were being trained by NATO. In the report, it mentioned that of the nine NATO trained brigades, only six of them were ready, and three of them would not be ready until May. So my guess is that we probably won't see a Ukrainian offensive before the 1st of June. Because even once these guys finish getting training at some point in May, they're still going to have to, transfer back to Ukraine. And then, you have probably a little bit more preparation that'll need to be done. The movement, like deploying to whatever part of the battlefield they're going to be deploying to, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this constant talk of Ukrainian counteroffensive, it's expected, and there's a lot of people that are saying different things like, oh, this hurts Ukraine, like talking about the possibilities and when and where, and it's like, well, in my opinion it really doesn't. It probably helps Ukraine because there's so many people talking about it now. There's so many different possibilities and time frames that this kind of thing can go down, and it's in my opinion it's something I like to speculate on, but it's not nothing I say I think is going to come true. Like honestly, like I really don't think that when I say something here, it's like there's a really high chance of that happening. I'm doing my best to like try to analyze these things and tell you guys what I think, but at the same time I'm only human. um I make the same general assumptions, or I have the same methods for making my assumptions that most other people do, and most people are really bad at predicting the future. I've made a couple changes to the maps here. I've added two different zones in the south, and I will go ahead and count up and add zones here to the north as well. But I've labeled these as the defense zones. This is a Herson defense zone, and based on that Deep State UA map, I estimate there's around 20,000 Russian troops in the area, and a couple artillery brigades. There is a high concentration of artillery brigades in the area, but that is likely due to opportunities to inflict mismatched casualties on the Ukrainian side here. For the Ukrainians to successfully cross the river and establish a bridgehead would be very difficult. So I think the Russians probably assume, and they're probably more right to assume, that it's unlikely. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's just unlikely. And if the Ukrainians do attempt it, it's likely they'll take heavy losses. But there is far more Ukrainian troops stationed on the Ukrainian side of the river here than are Russian troops on the Russian side. That means it's a more target-rich environment. It's probably one of the main reasons why Russia has so much artillery in the area there. In this zone right here that I've created, this is the Russian Zaporozhian defense zone. Based on that deep state UA map and the units that are in the area, there's about 90,000 plus Russian troops defending this area, and that has been divided into three different echelons. We've talked about this before, but just to go over them real quick again, the first echelon of Russian troops here is made up of Russian reserve rifle regiments. So these are not motorized or mechanized. They're not assault troops. They're trench infantry, essentially. If you were to give them like a specific task, name and matching task, they're trench infantry. The second one, the second echelon is a grouping of motorized rifle regiments that serve as like mobile fast reaction forces, best I can tell. And like some of these units might be on the front line manning it, but it's such a long front line, I highly doubt that you would want your troops massed and concentrated on the front. Really, this is the kind of area where Russia just wants to commit to like a heavy amount of surveillance, as many drones as they can, as much infrared and night vision as they can to try and spot anything, and then they call up these motorized rifle regiments to plug the gaps whenever something crazy happens, right? Like, say if there's some attempt at a breakthrough, it's just too much ground to cover um, for a force of even 100,000 troops, and it'll be a lot of ground to cover for a Ukrainian force trying to attack through here as well. And then the third echelon is fully equipped motorized. It's actually two fully equipped motorized divisions that sit in the rear as a reserve, and you can see all this on the deep state UA map. Basically, the information I've just given you is like a breakdown of what's going on with each individual unit here. You can see towards the rear motor rifle brigades, motor rifle division, motor rifle division. So, all right, guys, that is it for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.